I get to introduce Peter Oltchick to you all, author of Football for Fun, the story of Coach Fergie Ferguson, which was just released in early September this year. Peter got to come to South Dakota for the Festival of Books in Deadwood. It was really good timing. I wish I could say that we really planned that out, but I'm not sure that we actually did. But nonetheless, he got to do that. I think it was really fun for him, and maybe he'll talk about that a little bit more. So Peter Oltchick is a writer now, I guess, over the last decade or so.
Yep.
He had a career in marketing and business and business development, and then started writing. And he published a children's book in 2012 called Clean Clara. So you can go check that out on his website. And then he started working on Football for Fun. And I'm going to let him tell you all about that. Please mute just in case you have background noise. We never know when the dog's going to bark, do we? And after Peter's presentation, and he has slides, so hopefully you can see them, then we will have a Q&A session. And since we're a fairly small group, relatively small group, I'll have you all just unmute yourselves if you have a question and wave at me, and we'll talk about how to do that a little bit more after Peter's presentation. So thanks for joining us. Please mute yourselves, and Peter is going to take it away.
Deidre, thank you so much. It's great to be here. And just a couple of quick thank yous. First of all, to Deidre Slater and alumni Cody for believing in the book. This has been quite a journey, and it's really appreciated. I'm so happy with how things came out. And also tonight, we're going to have a couple of special guests, which means a lot to me. We have Dick Dunwitty, and I think Bill Bashar is going to be joining. Dick and Bill were alums from Deadwood High School and absolutely integral in helping me tell Fergie's full story. So thank you so much. And with that, tonight we're going to really get a feel for Stewart Ferguson's kind of journey. And I'm going to focus mostly on South Dakota with a couple of detours. And at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about my co-author, actually, Bill Bell. So really, for tonight, I want to start in Gregory. Stewart Ferguson was born in actually 1900, but really his formative youth years, 1908 to 1913, were in Gregory. He loved the energy of the day with the racing of horses. He also loved the energy of night, seeing all the saloon activities. So really, this was kind of his youth. 1913, we can see his father. His father was a Reverend, William T. Ferguson. So back during that time, Stewart was known as kind of a preacher's kid or a PK. And he would be considered at that time a rebellious PK. He definitely pushed the envelopes of behavior. And at that time, the family had no interest in football. Football was considered morally reprehensible to sort of preachers of that time. And Stewart Ferguson knew a little bit about the game, but that was really about it. However, in September of 1916, as kind of the book opens, he was invited by another preacher's kid to attend a game. And that was at Dakota Wesleyan University. At this point, they're living in Mount Vernon, which is about 12 miles from Dakota Wesleyan. Stewart Ferguson took his mom's bike. They went to the game, and he was instantly mesmerized by what he saw, sort of the aura of college football, if you will, and all the pageantry. And immediately when he came back from that game, he tried to convince his father that football could actually be the way to the pulpit, although he had no interest in following his father's career to the pulpit. But his dad agreed, and this sort of starts the journey of football and Stewart Ferguson. Just want to be able to forward the slide. Deidre, are we able to forward the slides?
Yeah, so hit your arrow key on your keyboard.
Yeah, this one's not working.
Sometimes it goes to sleep. Or if you take your cursor and then kind of go around to the bottom left corner, it might show up.
Oh yeah, let's do it on the left. That's
There we go.
much better.
There you go.
Okay, fantastic. So 1916, this is not Stewart Ferguson. He did not bulk up to be a real football player in pads, but this is Mark Payne, who actually was quite a football player at Dakota Wesleyan, and he was a record holder. He set the record for a 63-yard drop kick. And the drop kick was actually a play back then, which was really used for territorial advantage. Really, it was dropping the ball and then kicking it off the ground. And while Stewart Ferguson was at Dakota Wesleyan, he became consumed with breaking this record, all the way to the point of actually picking the day and the same field where the record was actually broken in Aberdeen in 1915. And his stars aligned to actually break this record in his attempt in 1919 on that same field. And he convinced his coach to actually play quarterback for the day. So I'm going to read the first reading to give you a feel for what Stewart Ferguson was thinking about trying to break this record. We kicked off to Northern, and they kicked back to me in a safety position after a couple of plays. I let the ball roll nearly to the goal line before picking it up, and then carefully and deliberately starting back up the field. I cautioned myself as I ran not to carry it beyond the 30-yard line, for I wanted the drop kick that would make me famous to travel 70 yards in distance. People better remember even numbers. I dropped exactly on the 30 after a weak tackle. I didn't worry whether it appeared I went down intentionally. I sort of wanted people to remember I coolly and calculatingly set up the kick. I wanted them to compliment me afterward on not being fool enough to try and gain an extra 10 or 12 yards, and so spoil a new world's record. The teams lined up. I barked the signals: 22, 46, 94, 35. The linemen turned their heads around and looked back at me in astonishment. I repeated the signals a little slower and considerably louder. After all, I reasoned, one must really be a quarterback or else play another position. I stretched out my arms and snapped my fingers for the backward pass from center. It was beautiful. Quickly, I dropped the ball and kicked. The ball sliced away, barely to the line of scrimmage. Like a knife through my mind, fuddled with disappointment, came the scorching words of Bud Doherty, the fiery Irishman who coached us. You dumb son of a blank, come off that field. Jesus wept, and so did I. So that gives you an initial flavor for Stewart Ferguson. I now want to jump forward a little bit to 1929. This is Dakota Wesleyan's president, Earl Rodman. And at this point, Stewart Ferguson had just spent the last 5 years actually as an assistant coach in football down south in Louisiana. And he was actually perfectly happy with what he was doing. But he got a telegram in the spring of 1929 from Dakota Wesleyan asking him to come back to school to be the athletic director and coach. Now, this was a complete surprise for Stewart. While he was at school, he was in and out of school, working part of the time. He actually lost his father in 1917 due to pneumonia. While at school, he was also not exactly the model Methodist. He really pushed the envelope of rules decorum. But on the other hand, while he was at school, he also was nominated to be a Rhodes Scholar. So it's a very interesting, complex situation for a smart guy, but also one that didn't expect to be in this position. But how could he say no? So in the spring of 1929, he actually comes back to Dakota Wesleyan. And for the second reading, I want to give you a feel for what his mind is like as he comes. It was late in the summer of 1929 when Ferguson arrived by rail. And as he stepped down from the Main Street station, his legs literally trembled with nervousness. I was frigidly afraid I couldn't make good, he wrote later. And he also remembered someone saying it was always tougher to make good in one's hometown. Still, as he walked toward the campus, he willed himself to swagger, as he imagined Notre Dame legend Knute Rockne did. I thought it might not hurt to pretend to be a coach. A voice called out, "Hey, Fergie, glad to see you back. You must have been a plenty hot coach down south." Ferguson grinned weakly and kept moving. A couple of blocks later, he walked onto campus and into College Hall, the administrative center, where he found Dakota Wesleyan President Earl Rodman waiting for him. An accomplished rural teacher, pastor, and in-demand public speaker, Rodman was entering his third year leading the university and quickly got to the point. He wasted no time putting Ferguson on guard, telling him his new job was a challenge. A favorite expression of Methodists, Ferguson noted, meaning you either produce miracles or get the hell out. Rodman reinforced Ferguson's uneasiness as they talked about the school's poor performance on the field, which the president blamed on Coach Hatfield and added with a smirk, but we let him finish the season. Ferguson wondered if the trustees would do that again. So this starts Coach Ferguson's return to Dakota Wesleyan. Yes, this is the White House. It is 1931, and we'll get to that in a second. You can see Herbert Hoover is about the sixth from the left, and Stewart Ferguson is wearing a light-colored suit right next to him. But when Ferguson returned to Dakota Wesleyan, his first team, 1929, was actually quite good, and they ended up being co-champions, and he was feeling a little bit like the toast of the town. In 1930, the big news was Ferguson actually traveled. He actually took his team to LSU because he had an old coach that was a friend there. So you're starting to see that his thoughts on football have started to expand, and how could he turn Dakota Wesleyan into a bigger place? In terms of the game of football, he was really, he learned quite a bit about this game in the South and that had been developing, how the game was more pass-oriented, how there was movement before the snap, and really something different than kind of the more power game that was more typical of the day. By 1931, Stewart Ferguson was thinking about actually trying to get Dakota Wesleyan to beyond the state. This game and this visit to the White House was actually part of a trip to West Virginia where he had 2 games scheduled. And this whole idea of Ferguson thinking about celebrity and travel and football together became an intoxication for him. And you'll see this develop as we go on in the story. On the bottom, you see the Corn Palace, the world's most famous Corn Palace. So although Stewart Ferguson was not as passionate about basketball, his teams won quite a bit at Dakota Wesleyan. 3 straight years of conference championships. They were invited to the big tournament of the day, which was the AAU tournament. And again, this helped Fergie kind of think bigger about himself in the school. He actually started to send applications out to see if he could potentially go to bigger schools. Nothing materialized. So really by about 1932, on the football side of things, the team wasn't doing quite as well, and Stewart Ferguson's thoughts on football were starting to change. He was no longer as interested in the violence of the game that kind of attracted to him on that first day. He wasn't into winning at all costs, and he also wasn't into recruiting. So these are 3 different types of things that are not really typical of your typical coach. And this is what really led Ferguson by 1933 to feel as though he was on a lesser standing at Dakota Wesleyan. And by the fall of 1933, he actually thought he was playing for his job and the game with their biggest rival, which was in Yankton. They didn't win that game, but it ends up that it really wasn't football that changed his career directory from Dakota Wesleyan. It was track. In the spring of 1934, his team was actually ruled, all of his team was ruled academically ineligible. And this sort of sent Fergie off. He wrote a letter to the newspaper. He immediately regretted it. But at that point, he had really had one foot out the door for the last couple of years. So in a few days, he resigned from Dakota Wesleyan, and it was time for something new. And in 1934, there was one opening that was available, and he went down to take a look. And that was in Arkansas. In the fall of 1934, Stewart Ferguson returned down south to a rural school in Arkansas called Arkansas A&M in the southeast corner of the state. He was named coach, and he lost every game in his first season. At the end of the first season, he was actually voted out to be coached by the local townspeople. But he stayed on to coach history because at that time, still in those times, there really wasn't an opportunity for a coach to go to another place. So for the next 4 years, Stewart Ferguson was a content history teacher, but football at Arkansas A&M started to change. They hired a coach who was all about the winning. and all about bringing in tough players. And over the course of these next few years, the team really became known for rough and violent play. And the president, by 1938, did not really want this team of toughies to be representing the school any longer. They paid for they played for pay, and they were actually supported by a slush fund from the school. So as we move into 1938, the president of the school, Marvin Bankston, had a problem. He wanted to keep football at Arkansas A&M. He liked the cachet of a small school having football, but wanted nothing to do with the reputation that the school had become on the football side of things. So what did he do? His solution was Stewart Ferguson. But remember, at this point, Stewart Ferguson is just a content history professor. And in the summer of 1938, he was actually down at LSU, both teaching and studying, working on his PhD. So Marvin Bankston actually sent his business manager down to try to convince Fergie to come back as coach. Well, this turned out to one of the strangest negotiations in sports history. And with a lot of back and forth, C.C. Smith actually convinced Stewart Ferguson to return via the back of an envelope. So what was signed on this strange contract was basically three things. Stewart Ferguson would coach, but he wouldn't be paid as a coach. So he really wasn't going to be technically coaching. Stewart Ferguson could control where the team played and all of the scheduling with no interruption from the president. And Stewart Ferguson didn't have to win a game, period. So in one way, Stewart Ferguson, when he said yes, felt he had sort of been slickered back into coaching. But yet in another way, he kind of wanted the opportunity to come back into the game and really on his terms. So what did this entail? Well, at A&M, the experiment of football started to take shape. In the first year, in 1938, it was a pretty kind of a standard year. The schedule had already been set. At the end of the year, Stewart Ferguson took his team to New Orleans as kind of a fun end of the year. But by 1939, he started talking a little bit more about his thoughts on football in college. And to him, football was really just a game. It was kind of part of physical education, and physical education was just part of the overall athletic experience. So he started talking about something called football for fun, but he didn't really know exactly what that entailed yet. But what he did know was that he wanted to give the game back to the players. He wanted to see how football could just be a part of the overall academic experience. And he also started to travel in a 1934 Chevrolet bus. So in 1939, he basically just said anybody who wanted to see the United States and have fun was entitled to come on this team. Some of his players that he had that first year, he had a 34-year-old preacher. He had a 34-year-old preacher. He had a barber, and he had a former cheerleader who ended up being his quarterback. So for 1939, as this team started to travel and kind of figure out what fun meant, with a lot of help from this quarterback, with lots of different formations, the team basically became known as the Marx Brothers of Football, told by a Cleveland sports writer in that year. From that year, in 1939, the team started to become more famous. And in 1940, the real turning point was actually in Hershey, Pennsylvania. In Hershey, the coach got a call from Collier's Magazine, which was really one of the two big popular weeklies at the time. They sent a photographer out to Hershey, and they were on the cover of that magazine. So by the inside the magazine. So by that time, the team was really starting to become famous. And in 1940, although the team started doing lots of hijinks around the country, Stewart Ferguson didn't always want his team to play the fools. And at a game in Rapid City, he came home. And in this game, Stewart Ferguson was basically, he had players that were now coaches around South Dakota, and he knew lots of folks. So in this game, he actually played it pretty straight. And one of his players, who we see on the right in a picture I couldn't resist, J.P. Leverett. This is a player who was both a gymnast and an aspiring bodybuilder who didn't really like the violence of the game. But in this game, he threw on the helmet. And on the second play, went out for a very deep pass, took it away from three defenders, ran all the way towards the end zone, put the ball between his legs, and somersaulted into the end zone. Stewart Ferguson, who was never one short of hyperbole, called this the greatest football play he's ever seen in his life. Later in, so basically by 1941, the team had traveled in 33 states, lost 30 games. And also they sang one smashing rendition of You Are My Sunshine in the booth of Bradley Tech, one of the stadiums they played at. But all this sort of came to an end by 1941. Pearl Harbor really put an end to the football for fun era, but it did not put an end to Stewart Ferguson's run in coaching football. And as we turn to 1944, I want to take a little bit of a step back. He does return to South Dakota, but during the war years, Stewart Ferguson actually was a flight instructor, if you believe it, in Louisiana. And it was after that time he got the call to come back to Deadwood. So his story starts to come back full circle to South Dakota. But before we talk about his time in Deadwood, I want to give you a little bit of the history of what the Deadwood community was like at the time. So here we have Homestake Mine. And in the 1890s to 1900s, Homestake was really where all the money was developing in the area. The money would come down from Lead into Deadwood. Deadwood is on the bottom, but all the money was being spent in Deadwood. So there really was this kind of big brother and little brother relationship between Lead and Deadwood. And as you can see on the bottom right, the mine actually further developed, and by 1910 is really functioning at a pretty high level. But this conflict, if you will, became an important part of the relationship with Deadwood and Lead and became kind of a blood brother relationship. I want to read something from the Deadwood Pioneer Times, which was from 1900, which gives you a good feel for what this relationship started to develop. We as a committee wish to state on behalf of our football team that when we want H.L. Lord, the Lead City idiot, to explain the rules and decide our games for us, we will inform him of our wants. The Lead is the same rant-headed idiot who tried to referee the Lead City Deadwood game here some weeks ago. His refereeing was simply rank, and he showed to those who attended his knowledge of football was lacking on every point, for every decision by him had to be reversed. So that is 1900. On the bottom, we have 1924, and these games had started to be played every year. They're actually played twice a year for a while. But as you can see in yellow, as I highlighted, after every article on the front page, it says beat Lead 27 times. So clearly this was something that that Coach Ferguson was walking into as he came into the town. Yeah. So as we talk about his time at Deadwood, I love this photo because Fergie, while he was at Deadwood, really was a soft-speaking person, but he spoke before and after practices to talk about his philosophies of the game. He still supported football for fun, but without the clowning around. And you can see that his team actively listened to him. He actually did do a fair bit of winning while he was at Deadwood, but winning was never top of mind. It was always about sportsmanship and spirit over the results on the scoreboard. And while he was at Deadwood, we meet his wife, Edna. Now, Edna was actually his assistant, if you believe it, 20 years younger while they were at Arkansas A&M. They had an illicit relationship starting in their sophomore year, but it really was in Deadwood when their relationship started to come together. They were both avid readers. They were both heavily into debate. Edna ran the library and taught English, while Stewart coached and taught civics. And to me, their relationship in Deadwood is what really stopped Fergie from running and helped him kind of find his footing, returning back to South Dakota. Another big part of their relationship was their son. So in 1947, they had a son, Freddie. Freddie was really a kind of the mascot of the football team. He hung around everywhere. He traveled with the team. And the father-son relationship between Stewart and Freddie, to me, starts to become the heartbeat of the story. And as you see on the right, when I got to return to Deadwood in 2014, standing on Ferguson Field and actually seeing the dedication they sent to him shows the imprint that Fergie left on Deadwood for the 11 and a half years that he was there as coach. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and also talk about my co-author and my late father-in-law, Bill. Bill Bell was a lifelong journalist. He is the bald guy on the top right and the bottom left. And he's here with two of his co-journalists, Norman Mailer and Pete Hamill. And Bill spent many years at the UPI. He spent over 25 years at the Daily News. He was the religion editor. He ran a City Beat column. I also want to talk a little bit about on the top, you see that Bill Gallo, who was an extremely skilled illustrator, said a little thing about Bill towards the end of his time at the Daily News. It says, Bill Bell is leaving the news to write books. That's like Joe DiMaggio leaving the Yankees, which I, even as a Mets fan, I can absolutely appreciate. Bill took everything seriously but himself. And as I was working on the acknowledgments of the book, I found some things I wanted to share with the audience in terms of what Bill was all about. And we'll start with on marriage. I never knew what true happiness was until I got married, and then it was too late. I'm starting up in journalism. And just like the old joke goes, I got into journalism because I was too lazy to work and too scared to steal. On heroes. The real heroes are ordinary men and women who do extraordinary things. And this last one, forgive the New York to Connecticut bias. This one is on curiosity. There's this story about the tourist who wants to take Metro North to Westport. The ticket agent says local or express. The tourist says, what's the difference? With express, you save 6 minutes. And the tourist says, what do people do with the 6 minutes they save? Good question. And I've got a suggestion. Fill those 6 minutes, 6 hours, 6 days, weeks, months, whatever, with the great gift of curiosity. To me, this is the gift that keeps us all open to new possibilities and fresh perspectives, and fully engaged participation in everything happening around you. It's what made Alexander Fleming wonder about mold in a lab dish, made Thomas Edison wonder about the glow in a filament, and made Isaac Newton wonder about the speed of the fall of an apple from a tree. Curiosity involves a sacred journey, what the theologians and mystics call a pilgrimage, living one moment to the next in wonder, hope, maybe fear, and with luck, great anticipation. So thank you, Bill, and thank all of you for listening. And I wanted to make sure I left plenty of time for questions. And I'm also happy to talk about how Bill and I both came to the story, which is a really wonderful thing. So thank you very much.
I'm going to have Peter tell us a little bit more about his relationship with Bill Bell. And I think I remember correctly, you kind of stumbled across all of this material.
Yeah. So how Bill came to this story, and then it sort of leads into mine. Towards the end of his time at the Daily News, Bill was born in Buffalo, but he grew up in Arkansas. And he would go to the Arkansas reunion every year. And in one of these reunions in 2000, his uncle at the time actually mentioned to Bill likely because the team, the Wandering Weevils, actually had a reunion in '99, the year before. It mentioned something about a crazy team that used to quote, travel all over the country and play for fun. And did he know anything about it? And, he didn't, but he said he would check it out. So, of course, being the journalist that he was, he went back home, got into full journalist mode, and did see that there was this team that had really had a few articles here and there over the years, but didn't have a full accounting of the team. And Bill decided that he was going to tell this story. So he worked really hard and sort of became partially retired at the news to give him some more time, and was able to get through a good portion of the story of the Wandering Weevils and started to look at the time before that, Stewart Ferguson growing up. Health issues got in the way. So even though he and his agent at the time were seeing the book in a bigger way, thinking more of a biography rather than a team book, he had to put it down. I had actually had no conversations with Bill about this book, maybe one offhanded. At the time, I was writing for children. But about 5 or 6 years later, I was in Connecticut, my mother-in-law's basement, and I actually felt a real urge to open up the box that was down there, knowing that it was something of Bill's. In the box was spirals everywhere, loose sheets of paper, notepads, and I felt compelled at this point, before I went on to something else, to see if I could really do something with this and try to turn this book into a biography. And with a lot of help, that actually happened. And I can tell you right now that since Dick is on the phone, Dick Dunwitty was the first person I got in contact with. And it's great how this happened. So as I was trying to learn a little bit more about the last 11 and a half years of the story, when Stewart Ferguson has basically left Arkansas, I saw that there was actually a blog that Dick ran in South Dakota with Deadwood High School, pretty much preserving all of the great people and times and the community and seeing pictures of those years. And I wrote Dick actually a letter, an old school letter, letting him know about how I was coming into the story. Dick responded pretty quickly. We spoke. Dick introduced me to Bill Bashara. Bill was absolutely wonderful to help me get into contact with former players and who would be available. And as I was planning a trip to come out for research in 2014, and that is truly how the biography took shape and how we were able to tell this story the way it should be told.
Such a fascinating, serendipitous find in the basement. Like you're being prodded on. That's great.
Yeah.
So if you all would like to, I think Dick has a question. He's unmuted and kind of waving. So go right ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm amazed. Everything Peter said is true, and it's amazing. The question I have is the memoir that Coach Ferguson did. We were all aware that he did this, but it was a mystery to us in the Deadwood High School as to what he documented about the school times. I personally have been tracing this memoir myself, and the last time I talked to Coach Ferguson's wife, she agreed to give me a copy of the memoir, but there was some reluctance because she'd already sold it to Peter. Or who did she sell it to, Peter?
Yeah, the story of the rights of the story, if you will, has gone through a few different phases. To the best of my recollection, Edna, back in the day, actually was approached by some people in California originally to try to do Stewart Ferguson's story. But that never really developed. They were looking at potentially a documentary, and things didn't really develop from there. There was also another time where a professor was interested in telling the story, but Edna got the feeling that he was more interested in his research rather than really telling the story that Fergie wanted to get out there, which is a lot about his travels. So those rights kind of fell apart. Bill, my father-in-law, actually met Edna when during one of his research trips. I believe that was 2002. They hit it off quite well, and Edna really appreciated the take that Bill had on the story. So now let's fast forward to 2014. I had the distinct pleasure, with help from Bill Bashara, to actually meet Jill, who is Stewart Ferguson's son's wife and Edna's daughter-in-law. Remember, Edna was about 20 years younger than Stewart Ferguson, and Jill was about 18 younger than Stewart Ferguson's son. So I actually got to go to Spearfish, sit down with Jill. Edna had left all of her most precious albums and keepsakes with Jill because she trusted Jill with the rights to Stewart Ferguson's story. When Jill and I went through and I talked about where I was at and how Bill and I were looking at the story, she actually saw us as the two people that she wanted to tell this story. And actually having her say that to me, sitting in her living room, that meant everything. And it was really at that point where I could kind of see the full tale come into play. So hopefully that helps address kind of this evolving story about actually telling the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's what Jill said to me the last time I talked to her, was that she did have the physical memoir. I had a question as to what form was it? Was it typed or handwritten?
Yeah, it was typed. It's about Stewart Ferguson's memoir, just for everybody is curious, unpublished. It was written about 1947, or at least that's when, it shows on the typed written paper. So he probably started working on it while he was at Deadwood. But it's important to remember that while he was at Deadwood, his relationship with the boys and the community and the team was central. When I asked certain people that I interviewed, some of the players, they had no knowledge of Stewart Ferguson's prior fame and his playing for fun and traveling, barnstorming across the country. So that really speaks to the fact that though he was writing about those experiences, he was completely focused on the health and well-being and leading of his kids in Deadwood, which I found really, really interesting, actually.
Yeah. This is all very true. I'm totally made. I want to make an admission here. I never was a physical person because I had polio in 1947. So I wasn't allowed to do any sports in high school. And then in my senior year, I asked Coach Ferguson if I could be a manager. And he made the manager of the basketball team that turned out to be state champion. But he included me just like he included all the athletes. He was a wonderful person. He was an amazing person.
As Dick's talking, he reminds me of another story. If you guys will happen to have it here, there was a player named Sheldon Jacobs. He was the class of '48, actually. Sheldon was a small, slight, like Stewart Ferguson. He also liked the fellow small guys. He was much more of a musician, but he actually tried out for the football team in his senior year. He thought this was finally his moment. And this is from the book, but it's fascinating in terms you get a feel for what Stewart Ferguson was like. He didn't make the team, but practiced daily and made an impression on Ferguson as his dutiful manager throughout the season, much like Dick. Plus, his coach, now universally known as Fergie across the Deadwood community, naturally gravitated to fellow little guys. Towards the end of the season, Ferguson called his number and sent him in. A lifetime later, a laughing Jacob still remembered the day. He put me in for 1 or 2 plays. It was just an act of kindness, so I could say, yeah, I played football for Deadwood. I love that. I just want to add one more part. In the spring, Sheldon Jacobs was actually a very good track athlete. He was fast. So here's a little bit from the spring. Sheldon showed up for track and received a critical lift from Fergie. The thing that sticks in my mind was a very important thing in my life, recalled Jacobs. He taught me how to psych up. Basically, it's mental conditioning. Part of it is convincing yourself you can win. And I learned that and I practiced it in some respects. It's been with me my entire life. So that's kind of what Dick was talking a little bit about, that Stewart Ferguson had a feel for every single individual, on that team, or people that weren't even necessarily on the team. I love that one. When I got to talk to Sheldon on the phone, he was fantastic.
That's very true. He treated me the same. I mean, I didn't feel any different than because I wasn't an athlete. He treated me it was personal.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm really moved. As you know, I've got a Facebook site on the Deadwood High School before 1972, which is historic Deadwood before 1950, schools before 1972. And this is so amazing to see you come along and fill in all the holes that are missing that I've dealt with over 15 years. And we talked, and yes, I still have your handwritten letter or your old style letter.
You don't want to see my handwritten letter. I've been writing the same way since I was in third grade. So yes, that was absolutely typed. But I wanted to add something that Dick was just talking about. So Deadwood versus Lead, it's incredible if you read the book to see that this truly was a blood rivalry, especially amongst, both the community as well as the players. However, in 1971, the school district came together for lots of the reasons that these things happen, for money and to make for just a better overall scholastic experience. So when I returned in 2014, I had to see a game in September. And I have to say that actually seeing the word Gold Diggers on the uniform at Ferguson Field and not the word Bears, that took me back for a second. But it was great to see actually fans that were truly on both sides of the ledger as one and enjoying their team, in unison. I just found that kind of moving, to be honest.
We all wanted the history to be told, and now you've done it.
I appreciate that, Dick. I use the word labor of love quite a bit for this effort because truly that's what it was. The labor side of it, first of all, trying to deconstruct, if you will, a lot of what I found from my father-in-law, both in very hard to read handwriting. I can tell you that sitting around my mother-in-law's table often, she actually was very impressed with my ability to read Bill's handwriting because she couldn't read a letter of it. So, that was sort of part of my investigative work. But then also really trying to go to the text that was on the computers as I tried to think what was really the narrative structure to tell this story in the best way possible, and then to look for more material to really give it its depth that it deserved. And I can tell you that the people at the Deadwood Public Library, the fact that they were able to work so hard to digitize that newspaper, because when I was there, I got the Deadwood Pioneer Times in this huge, put on the gloves, open it very carefully, one page at a time in pencil and taking notes, and to be able to then go home, maybe a few years later, and to really read page by page, year by year, that helped so much. So I'm so appreciative of the Deadwood Public Library taking that project on. It was monumental.
Yeah, well, the newspaper is just a fabulous research object. All the truth is there. You can you saw the individual pieces that many had forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to put in a plug for digitization here, and it is not cheap. And if you're a fan of digitization and you have some money to donate, find a project that your heart responds to and fund that digitization. That's something that we're always looking for, and I know probably every archive in the country is probably looking for. And there is a great Chronicling America is a newspaper digitization program that's funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and so it's all online, it's all free, and you can always look and see, if the paper you're looking for is there. But yeah, I mean, those are one of the things that I think has helped these kinds of projects come to life, is having access to those documents from New York, right?
Yeah.
Where you could be anywhere and you can get online. And you'll have to tell me if this is right, Peter.
Yeah.
We at South Dakota Historical Society Press got all kinds of things in the mail and the email during COVID. And we kind of thought, oh, when people are quarantined, they're finishing up these projects. And I just kind of assumed that was part of your finishing your project, but maybe that was incorrect.
Yeah, in terms of COVID, no, I would say that, really, 2019 is kind of when I felt right towards the end of that year, but I felt really good about the shape of the manuscript, and had, a couple of folks that I trusted. I've sort of allowed them to read it, which, as an author was always a very kind of scary thing. But so yeah, so by 2020, I was much more in trying to find the right partner that could really take the book and the story all the way down the path that I thought it deserved. And as you can see, I've been working extremely hard on actually trying to give the book its voice and tell this story. And it's been great. I mean, we're only a month in, and I can't tell you how many conversations I'm having on the side about the book. So yeah, so I guess it really was pre-COVID for me anyway.
Well, I'm going to have to change my narrative then.
Coach Ferguson, and he was an amazing person. He was like, I don't know if you know Dr. Deming, who was went to Japan, and he became the premier quality control person. He didn't believe in grading students, and Coach Ferguson didn't either. I don't know whether you know that or not. And so he was in conflict with Berger and Krug, because he didn't want to grade people, but when they forced him to, he gave the grades. Personally, yeah. I got an A.
Congratulations. That sounds right. I mean, I'm remembering a story that's in the book where all the guys on the football team would get Fergie to just start talking about the game in civics class. So that was the end of the civics discussion right there. And they just kind of relived the last football game. So you could tell that he was very easily able to be distracted and to have fun with his players even during class. Although let me just say, in terms of his history, he was an absolute historian. Stewart Ferguson's PhD for Lake Charles High School is actually the definitive research project on Lake Charles, and is in one of the colleges and is referred to quite a bit. So an absolute lover of history, and and a big reader along those lines.
Yeah, he had the ability to explain something to you, and as he explained it, you could just see it in your head. Like we now watch these informationals on TV and visualize things we've never seen before. He had the same ability to tell us about these. And he used to tell us about television. You may laugh about that, but we didn't even know what television was until he told us.
if you read the book, for anyone who's on, there is some great research about when TV came into Deadwood. And I can tell you, without giving too much away, that Stewart Ferguson actually became one of the first people to provide quotes to the newspaper about how much he was enjoying television, because at that point he was recovering from an illness. So it's funny that you bring that up, but I'm distinctly remembering him talking about how much he loved being able to see television in Deadwood. Yeah.
Well, but he told us about the future. He told us that he prepared us to go out of this little community out into the world at large and be prepared for what we were going to see.
Yeah.
He did, in many ways, it wasn't all sports. I
No,
mean,
for
Yeah,
he
it
was
sounds like
totally,
he was a teacher and a leader in everything he did.
yes. Yes.
And that probably happens a lot in teaching, but the stories kind of stay with us and we don't get to celebrate those individuals. So this is such a great opportunity to tell that story.
Yeah, I think it was great that high school ended up being his last 11 and a half years, because that's really where he actually got a time to get to know kids on a more personal level. I think the times at Arkansas A&M, absolutely wild and overwhelming, but you don't necessarily get to know those kids in the same way you do slowing down in the high school world, at least in my opinion.
Especially in a small school where you see
Yeah.
those kids over and over and over.
Yeah.
And we are just about out of time. This has been such a fun discussion. So I'm going to wrap things up a little bit. If you don't already have Football for Fun, you can purchase that through the South Dakota Historical Society Press or through the Heritage Store for the South Dakota Historical Society Foundation. Those are all online. We also have a store is in, we call it brick and mortar, in the basement or bottom level of the state capitol. We also usually have it in our Cultural Heritage Center, but that is under renovation at least till 2025, so you can't go there. But it's also available wherever you like to buy your books.